Every October for close to 20 years, I carried armloads of living plants down to the compost pile behind my garden shed and buried them. Red blooms still open on the stems, roots still white and firm in my hands. My neighbors did the same, and the garden centers counted on all of us doing it again the following May. However, the plant we kept throwing away had the wrong name printed on its label, and the mistake behind that name is more than 230 years old. 20 years before I learned any of this, I was already designing perennial borders for a living. Peonies, daylilies, hostas, catmint, plants I trusted to vanish in November and push back up through cold spring soil, bigger than the year before. That returning act is the entire promise of a perennial border, and I built my working life around it. Yet every autumn I treated my geraniums like spent party decorations. The zonals in the front bed carried their fire-engine clusters above those dark horseshoe markings on the leaves. Ivy type spilled out of the window boxes like green waterfalls studded with pink. Beside the back door, the scented ones released rose and lemon into the evening air whenever a sleeve brushed past. All of them went on the pile the week the forecast first whispered about frost, and I never once questioned it. A man can spend 30 years in a trade and still carry a blind spot the size of a barn. The questioning began on a working trip to the Southern California coast, where a client wanted help laying out a courtyard garden. Against a whitewashed stucco wall stood a geranium the size of a shrub rose, 5 feet of it, crowded with coral red bloom heads from knee height to eye level. The trunk at its base was as thick as a broom handle and grey-barked like an old lilac. When I asked the homeowner how she coaxed a geranium to that size in a single season, she laughed at me. That plant, she said, was 14 years old. Her mother had planted it. The thing had never spent one night indoors, never been covered, never been fed, anything fancier than compost. On the long flight home, a man who had spent his career reading plant catalogues sat there feeling the ground shift under him. Because if her geranium could live 14 years against a sunny wall, then the hundreds of geraniums I had composted over the decades did not die of old age. They died of my ignorance. And the trail of blame runs backward through every nursery catalogue ever printed, all the way to a library in Sweden in the 1750s. Before we open that library door, you need to meet the plant as it really is. The plant in your window box belongs to a group called Pelargonium. Botanists recognize around 280 species of them, and the ancestors of nearly every garden geranium grew wild in South Africa, many in the winter rainfall country around the Cape of Good Hope. That homeland matters more than any other fact in this video. The Cape does not freeze. Its native pelargoniums never needed to endure ice, so they never evolved a defense against it. What they mastered instead was drought, long rainless months under African sun, and that one talent is the reason a plant from your window box can sleep all winter in a paper bag. Because they come from a frost-free world, garden geraniums are hardy outdoors only in zones 10 and 11, the nearly frost-free strip along the bottom edge of the American map. Plant a zonal geranium in coastal California, southern Arizona, or central Florida, and it behaves exactly like the shrub in that courtyard. It blooms through the winter months, builds a woody trunk, and carries on season after season with no help from anyone. The same plant, the identical genetics, sold in Minnesota or Ohio or Maine, gets a plastic tag with the word annual on it. Nothing about the plant changed on the truck ride north. Only the marketing did. A true annual is programmed by its genes to sprout, flower, set seed, and die inside 1 year, the way a zinnia or a sunflower does. No such program exists anywhere in a geranium. It dies in northern gardens for one reason only: somebody leaves it outside to freeze. So how does a long-lived African perennial end up wearing a throwaway tag in every garden center north of Atlanta? The answer begins with the most famous botanist who ever lived, and with an error he never got the chance to fix. In 1753, the Swedish naturalist Carl Linnaeus published the great book that gave science its modern system for naming plants. Europe at that time grew two kinds of plants that everyday people called geraniums. One was the hardy cranesbill, a tough little wildflower of European meadows and hedgerows, perfectly at home under a blanket of snow. The other was the newer, showier arrival from the Cape, carried north in the holds of trading ships and fussed over in glasshouses. Linnaeus examined both, saw the same odd beak-shaped seed pod on each, and filed every last one of them into a single genus he called geranium, after the Greek word for crane. With one stroke of the pen, the tender African shrubs and the frost-proof European wildflowers became officially the same thing. A French botanist named Charles-Louis Leretier could see they were nothing of the kind. The African plants grew differently, flowered differently, and collapsed at the first touch of ice. In 1789, he formally split them into their own genus and named it Pelargonium, from the Greek word pelagos, meaning stalk, because that beaked seed pod put him in mind of a storksbill rather than a crane's. Science accepted the correction, and every botany textbook printed since has kept the two genera on separate pages. But the timing was brutal. Linnaeus had died about a decade earlier, celebrated across Europe, and the buying public had spent a full generation calling the African plants geraniums. Nursery catalogues had the old name set in type. Customers asked for it at the counter, and no seller in his right mind was going to confuse them over a Greek bird. The wrong name stuck fast. But here is the detail that everyone missed at the time and that gardeners still miss today. A sticky name is never free. When you believe you own a geranium, you apply the frost rules for geraniums, and for the plant in front of you, those rules are dead wrong. More than 2 centuries later, that clerical error is still marching millions of healthy perennials into compost piles every October. You can run the evidence yourself this afternoon with nothing but your own 2 eyes. Walk out to a hardy cranesbill, the low blue or magenta wildflower type, and lean in close to a single bloom. Count the petals. 5 of them, evenly sized and evenly spaced, arranged like the spokes of a small wheel. You could spin that flower and it would read the same from any angle. Now go stand over your potted zonal and study one floret from the cluster. 2 petals rise at the top, and 3 spread wider below them, a different size and a different set. The bloom has a top and a bottom, the way a face does. Every true pelargonium wears that lopsided signature, and once your eye learns to read it, you can sort the 2 plants from across the yard. The upright pair over the lower trio is the plant's own sworn testimony that it was never a cranesbill's cousin in anything but family, and never a true annual either. Run down your own collection and the verdict lands on every one of them. The upright zonals in the bed, the trailing ivy types in the baskets, the lemon and rose and peppermint scented leaf kinds, the big velvety regals with their pansy faces. Every one of them carries that 2/3 bloom, and every one is a pelargonium to the marrow. 4 plants you may have been buying fresh every spring, and not an annual among them. Knowing your plant is a tender perennial is one thing. Trusting it to survive 4 months in a dark basement with no soil, no water, and no light is a much bigger ask. So before the method comes the why. Think about what the Cape demands from a plant. Rain arrives in one concentrated season, and for month after rainless month afterward, every living thing out on those slopes is on its own. Pelargoniums answered by turning their own bodies into canteens. Grip a zonal geranium low on the stem and feel it. Thick, fleshy, almost like the arm of a jade plant, because the tissue inside is semi-succulent and packed with stored water and food. The roots carry the same reserves. Purdue Extension puts the consequence in one plain sentence. Geraniums form no resting structure, no bulb and no corm, so the plant must carry itself through hard times as living stem and root tissue. There is no tulip-style package buried underground doing the storing. The plant is the storage organ, from the crown of its roots to the tips of its branches. Cut a dahlia off from its tuber and the top dies in days. A geranium walks around with its tuber built into its own body. Now put the African drought strategy in a Midwestern basement. A dark, cool room with dry air is, from the plant's point of view, one more rainless season back home on the veld. It drops its leaves, sips from its own reserves, and waits for the weather to turn. Your grandmother's generation grasped this without a single botany lesson, which is why root cellars across the northern states once had geraniums hanging upside down from the rafters, bare roots in the air, right between the onion braids and the seed potatoes. Those gardeners could not have told you a thing about Cape rainfall. They knew the plants came back in spring, and knowing that was enough. Now, the plant could stop at surviving, it goes further than that. The full system below is the same one recommended by university extension programs at Iowa State, Illinois, Minnesota, and Wisconsin, and the one I run every year now in my own house. Start in autumn with an eye on the forecast, because everything must happen ahead of the first frost. Choose your candidates honestly. A plant carrying leaf spots, rot, or a population of insects is a poor traveler and a risk to every healthy plant stored beside it. So those go on the pile without regret. Pick a dry afternoon for the work if the weather allows, since soil shakes free of dry roots far more willingly than it lets go of wet ones. For each keeper, sink a spade in a circle around the plant and lift it with as much root as the ground will surrender. Cradle the root ball over a wheelbarrow and work the soil loose with your fingers until the roots hang bare and clean. No washing needed, and no perfection either, so long as no clods remain. Give the plants a few days lying in a shaded, airy spot to dry on the surface, because damp tissue going into storage is an open invitation to mold. If you grow several colors, tie a loose paper label around each stem now, since a bare, dormant geranium keeps its secrets until it blooms again. Then choose your container, and I use that word loosely. A large paper grocery bag, standing open at the top, with one or two plants set inside, roots down, or skip the bag and hang each plant upside down from a nail in a ceiling joist, the old root cellar way. Either approach wants the same room around it. Cool, dark, and dry, holding somewhere between 45 and 50 degrees Fahrenheit. An unheated basement corner qualifies, so does an attached garage that never freezes, or a spare bedroom with the heat vent closed. The one non-negotiable is frost itself. Let the room freeze and the water inside those succulent stems turns to ice crystals, and the canteen bursts from within. Through the winter, the plants ask for one small kindness. 2 or 3 times between November and March, take them out of the bags or down from the nail and stand their roots in a bucket of water for an hour or two. Let them dry off afterward, then return them to storage. While you have them out, glance over each plant and pinch away any leaf or stem going soft or fuzzy with mold before it spreads. That is the entire maintenance schedule for 4 months. No light, no soil, no daily attention, no expense. Expect the plants to look worse and worse as the weeks pass, and do not lose your nerve over it. The leaves yellow and drop until the stems stand naked. Branch tips wither and die back an inch or more. Every bit of that is the plant spending its reserves exactly as designed, drawing down the pantry to keep the core alive. The verdict on each plant comes from a single test, the stem squeeze. Wrap your fingers around the main stem and press. Firm and solid means the canteen holds and the plant lives. Shriveled, soft, or papery means the reserves ran dry, and that one leaves for the compost with a clear conscience. In a decent storage room, the survivors will outnumber the failures many times over, and by late winter you will catch yourself peeking in on them like sleeping grandchildren. Then comes March and the resurrection. Bring each survivor into the light and take your pruners to it without mercy. Remove every dead tip and every withered branch, working downward until the blade meets tissue that shows firm and green inside. Some years that leaves stubs only a few inches tall, and the plant resembles a fistful of green cigars with roots attached. Pot each one into fresh soil, water it thoroughly, and set it in your sunniest window or under a shop light. Within a week or two, buds you never suspected begin to swell along those bare stubs, pale green knuckles pushing through grey bark. Grow the plants on like house plants across the final cold weeks. Once your final frost date passes, harden them off as you would any transplant. A few hours of outdoor shade stretching into full sun across a week, and walk them back out to the beds and window boxes they left in autumn. One honest limit before we go further, because I promised you practice, not a sales pitch. Dormant bag storage is most dependable for the thick-stem zonal types, the classic uprights with the horseshoe leaves, since they carry the fattest reserves in the family. The ivy leaf trailers in your hanging baskets run on thinner stems with less stored away inside, and in a bag they can fail. For those, pot the plant up and winter it growing in a bright window instead, or restart it from cuttings, a job I cover in a few minutes. The scented types and the big flowered regals also winter best that green and growing way. If a method this cheap and this old is news to you, that is exactly what this channel is for, so hit subscribe. Every week here on Bloom Relay, we keep finding perennials hiding in plain sight. By the middle of May, the difference between a saved geranium and a bought one stops being theory and becomes visible from the street. The plant you carried up from the basement opens its season with a root system that spent all of last summer building itself, wide and deep and ready to drink the moment it hits warm soil. Beside it, the little starter plant from the store is a rooted cutting a few months old, still living out of a suitcase. Your overwintered veteran also carries those thick storage stems, a bank account of energy the youngster cannot match, so when real warmth arrives, it does not need weeks to settle in. It erupts, throwing new growth in every direction while the store-bought plant is still deciding whether it likes its new home. Around the second week of June, expect a neighbor to pause at your fence and ask what on earth you feed those things, and you can tell her the truth, which is that you fed them a paper bag and a dark room. The hard March haircut supplies the second half of the magic. A geranium stem carries a dormant bud at every node, every point where a leaf once joined. Left unpruned, the plant pours energy into its tips and grows long, sparse, and bare-ankled. Cut it back hard to those low green stubs, and the plant answers by pushing fresh shoots from node after node all at once, the way a well-pruned rose responds to a February pruning. One old stem becomes 4 or 5 young ones, and every young branch ends in a flowering tip. Keep pinching out the soft tips with your thumbnail through June, and each pinched stem forks again. Run that arithmetic across a whole season, and you see why my second year and third year plants carry double and triple the bloom heads of anything on a garden center bench. Surviving the basement was the smallest part of what that plant accomplished. It banked a full year of root growth, absorbed a hard pruning that multiplied every stem, and returned to the window box paying compound interest. That is the comeback. Delivered, and one flower rescued, is a fine start. The Flower Gardener's Bible carries all 38 plants and the month-by-month care calendar, $9 at bloomrelay.co. You will see the book cover and that URL on your screen now, and while you jot the address down, the second road through winter deserves its turn, because a dark basement is not the only way home. Maybe cellar storage makes you uneasy, or maybe you own a bright, cool room and would rather keep some living green company through January. Then keep the plant awake instead. Before frost threatens, dig your best geranium. Rinse the foliage well with the hose first, top and underside, because aphids and whiteflies adore a warm indoor winter even more than the plant does, and one stowaway in October becomes a colony by Thanksgiving. Then settle the plant into a container just large enough for its roots, cut the top back by 1/3 to 1/2, and carry it to your sunniest window. South-facing glass is ideal. Keep that room cool, around 65 degrees in the daytime and down into the mid-50s at night. Conditions that suit a Cape native far better than a toasty living room ever will. Water only when the soil surface feels dry under your fingertip, and withhold every drop of fertilizer until spring, because a resting plant fed nitrogen in December stretches into pale, weak, leggy growth that helps nobody. Come March, prune it back hard just as you would a bagged plant, and watch it rebuild into a dense green mound before your garden beds are even workable. Fair is fair, so here is the honest trade between the two roads. Windowsill plants generally return fuller and reach bloom sooner than plants forced through full dormancy, since they never dropped all the way into sleep. The price is a bright window occupied from October clear to May, and if you hope to save more than 2 or 3 plants, that price climbs fast, because south windows in winter are the most contested real estate in a gardener's house. The paper bag asks for no window, no pot, no soil, and not 1 cent, and it will hold 20 sleeping plants on a single basement shelf. Under my own roof, the two finest plants earn windowsills and the rest go to the basement in bags, and I would suggest that same split to anyone starting out this fall. Now for the limit that no plant tag will ever mention, and the old trick that turns it into an advantage. Even a well-saved geranium ages. Somewhere around its third or fourth year, the lower stems turn woody and brown, like miniature tree trunks. The growth stretches leggy, no matter how faithfully you pinch, and the bloom begins to thin. The plant is not failing you. Turning woody is what an aging African shrub does by nature, and gardeners have kept the fix in their apron pockets for 4 centuries. You take cuttings, and the old plant hands its youth to a new generation of itself. Late summer is my season for it, though early spring serves just as well. Choose your strongest plant and remove 3 to 4 inch pieces from its branch tips with a clean, sharp knife. Strip the leaves from the lower half of each cutting and dip the cut end in rooting hormone if you keep it on the shelf. Stick the cuttings a couple of inches deep into a pot of vermiculite or a blend of perlite and peat moss, a rooting medium moist and airy in a way garden soil can never be. Keep it evenly damp on a bright sill out of direct sun. In 6 to 8 weeks, a gentle tug that meets resistance tells you roots about an inch long have formed, and each cutting graduates to its own small pot of ordinary potting soil. What you hold at that point is your same beloved plant, identical in every gene, wearing a brand new young body. The color, the leaf pattern, the fragrance, every trait carries over exactly, ready for another 3 vigorous years. Root 5 or 6 at a time, and the spares become the cheapest gifts in gardening. A start of your own porch geranium pressed into a neighbor's hands in a paper cup. Exactly how these plants have moved between households for as long as anyone has grown them. For certain geraniums, a jar of cuttings is far more than renewal. Purdue Extension points out that many cultivars, notably the double-flowered types with rose-light ruffled blooms and the variegated types with cream-splashed leaves, exist only through vegetative propagation. No seed packet on earth can recreate them because their finest traits refuse to travel by seed. Lose the plant and that variety vanishes from your garden for good, and possibly from commerce too, since nurseries retire old cultivars every year in favor of newer patented ones. The windowsill cutting is how those beauties survive at all, and every gardener who roots one becomes, with no ceremony at all, a curator. Which brings me to the part of this story I find hardest to tell without my voice catching. Pelargoniums reached Europe from the Cape around the year 1600, and in those days a single plant was a genuine treasure. The first arrivals were rare, prized greenhouse specimens, sheltered under glass by wealthy collectors as another household might guard a telescope or a fine clock. The only way such a plant spread was as cuttings, passed hand to hand across borders and generations, each snip of green stem a gift of the entire plant. 400 years later, that hand-to-hand chain has never once broken. All over this country today, there are families tending a geranium line their grandmother started, an unbroken thread of cuttings taken from cuttings, decade after decade, the same salmon pink bloom opening on a porch rail this summer that opened on a different porch before anyone now watering it was born. Hold that thought for a second. A geranium, cared for the way I have shown you, can outlive the gardener who starts it. Precious few things in a flower bed can make that claim, and fewer still arrive in a plastic six-pack for pocket change. So here is where 20 years of my own composted geraniums have finally landed me. Every plant you carry down to the basement this October is a plant you are not buying next May, and every cutting that roots on your sill is a free plant beyond that. Over the years, across the beds and boxes pots, that arithmetic adds up to real money staying in your pocket. Call it $40, $60, $80 a spring that the garden centre was counting on collecting from you forever. But the money stopped being my reason a long while ago. What stays with me is that a living perennial, a plant built to endure for decades, was branded disposable by a naming accident, older than the United States, and gardeners like you and me have paid for that clerical slip every autumn since, without ever being told there was a choice. This fall, when the frost warning crawls across your evening screen, you will know better. You will walk out to the flower bed carrying a spade instead of standing over the compost pile, because the plant out there was never an annual. It is an heirloom that has been waiting 200 years for someone to treat it like one. If this changed how you see the flowers on your own porch, the next video on your screen digs into more perennials the industry sells as throwaways, and I will meet you there, spade in hand.